Right, right. And so, can you actually elaborate on how can one support autonomy, relatedness, and competence, but and also what does that behavior look like for those specific needs?
Yeah, well, I actually focus a lot on autonomy and I do a lot of research on goal setting. And so goals are like representations of something you want to happen. So, Robert, you're out of school for a year. You're trying to figure out which direction to go. And my guess is you have some personal goals. Some goals, you need to make money so you could live in an apartment. You said you moved into a new place. You probably have a goal of continuing to learn and then finding a path that will lead to a satisfying career. So with goals, ideally, you're generating them and you're interested in them and you value them. But some of us, especially around education and with our parents, uh, they might have some strong ideas about what occupational goals you should pursue and which ones are acceptable. And as someone who majored in psychology, it's very common that you tell your parents or you tell adults, I want to go for psychology or I want to be a teacher. And they say, but what are you going to do with that? And why don't you become an engineer or a computer scientist or a doctor? Uh, my daughter's marrying this really nice young man, and he loves music, and he wants to become someone who does film scores for movies and for TV shows. He's already doing some things like that. But most of the people who his parents tell about this, they say that's crazy. That's not something that's likely to succeed. Why doesn't he just become an engineer? So, unfortunately, in terms of not being autonomy supportive, you can often find people who will not even listen or care about what you say, even if you tell them, I love music, it's my passion, I love it. I know that I might not find a career as a performer, but I have these other ideas too. So, uh, at its heart, I think autonomy is just listening and showing respect for the other person's ideas and beliefs and uh, goals, and trying to be interested in those, and certainly trying not to communicate, oh, you're on the wrong track. That's a stupid, stupid idea. I gotta, I gotta give you some reality testing here. Now, fortunately, not that many people do that when we tell them our goals. But there's another thing people do, which is they try to be cheerleaders and they say, "Oh, that's great. Yeah, yeah, that's going to be good. I'm all fully behind you." And what we find is that that's not a lot of help. That doesn't damage you, but that's not a lot of help. The most helpful thing is if people listen and show interest and ask questions like, "Oh, well, how did you come up with that goal? How's it going?" Uh, so taking the other person's perspective, uh, being interested in listening, I think, is the heart of autonomy support. Relatedness, uh, I think I haven't thought about that so much because I focus on autonomy, but relatedness, uh, I, you know, I think showing interest, showing appreciation of other people, showing some baseline level of trust, starting out like the other person is a good faith partner in the relationship. You may have to revise that when the person does certain things, and uh, because not everyone out there are psychopaths out there. There are takers. There are people who will say terrible things about you to other people. But it's usually good to uh, be open and to be willing. the key to building relationship, it's self-disclosure and sharing. But there are some rules about sharing. You don't disclose too early. You don't disclose like really personal things when you don't know the person so well. So there's kind of a process that you have to trust in terms of building relationships. And I think it's real important not to care about everyone liking you. Just find that maybe 5 or 10 people would be great.
Yeah. Wouldn't that load onto autonomy though, to have that type of
Yeah.
ignorance of too of many like not non-important opinions, but opinions that are not really related to you,
This
right?
is what's hard is that competence and autonomy, the three needs are interconnected.
Mm-hmm.
And we often will say that autonomy is something to consider even when you're pursuing relatedness. So one of the classic conflicts is you might, let's say, if you're single, you meet someone, you're romantically interested, it seems to be going well, but your partner seems to want you to be a certain kind of person. So in fact, my son-in-law, he, he would he would date girls and he would get the message, well, you're a nice guy, I like you, but you got to give up this music shit. And so the idea is you sacrifice what you care about in order to maintain this relationship with me. And all of us do that a little bit because there's like multiple parts to us. And we feel like in a relationship, okay, I got to make some adjustments. But that's often restricting your autonomy and competence too. Like, let's go with music. If you think about like the example of most in films, when you have a music teacher, they push really hard and they're very demanding, and or in sports too. And sometimes you get the message, I'm going to help you become like an Olympic performer, but you got to do it my way. Don't ask any questions. Don't suggest different ways of doing it. You got to do it exactly the way I do it. So that's, you got to sacrifice. If you want to be competent, you got to sacrifice autonomy. And the
Mm.
truth is, we should never have to sacrifice autonomy in order to make friends or have relationships. We should never sacrifice autonomy in order to become competent and skillful. And that when people are doing that, they're being controlling. They're trying to manipulate, coerce, seduce you into doing what they want you to do, to confirm their idea about what relationships are like or what it takes to be an Olympian. So I'm always focusing on like, of course, I want to be connected. I want to be competent, but I'm always also monitoring whether I'm feeling controlled.
Yeah, I think
And
it's a
if you think
sorry.
about, yeah, if you think about work, school, relationships, you'll often feel control.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that it's one of those slippery slopes where like you can easily rationalize to yourself that being in like doing this type of sport or doing this type or seeing this type of person or even just hanging out with your friends a bit more than
Yeah, yeah,
normal is promoting your autonomy because you like this novelty aspect of it, or it seems like the reward mechanisms are kind of artificially manufactured and that kind of like deceives you in a little bit, and it's very subtle in that. And I think that's why like a lot of people kind of realize that part a little later on, and it becomes very damaging
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's always like going it's like always a miniature attack to their autonomy every time they engage in that
yeah,
type
yeah.
of not
No, and
self-destructive behavior but something along those lines.
well, and I think sometimes it's more subtle too. So you're doing some work in the like restaurant bar industry, and I month or so ago, I heard a podcast about it's interesting when you work at a bar and there's a lifestyle you develop and it involves a lot of drinking and a lot of using of drugs.
Yeah.
And there's something that can happen where it's kind of normative and some of the people you might like, and you'll belong to a group, and it's natural to think, yeah, I'll just do this too. But it's a little tricky. Now, there it doesn't feel like control, but it's a little bit more, you're being seduced into a different kind of lifestyle than you might choose.
Hmm.
And you're being seduced because, like, there's someone you really like, and this is a way to get closer to them, or
Or you want some type
you
of approval from your bosses
yeah,
or your colleagues.
exactly. And unfortunately, uh at some jobs and in some circumstances, you get the sense you have to do that, otherwise you're going to pay for it. So, uh, the show Ted Lasso, I don't know if you watched it. It's a great show. It's about soccer. It's a coach who's a very kind person, but he's very autonomy supportive. And there was this one fellow who started as the guy in charge of the uniforms, but it turns out he was a genius at soccer planning and strategy, and he got promoted. Uh, where was I going with this? But he finally moved to another organization and became the head coach. But in that organization, it was understood that, you go out with the boss, and you drink a lot, and he's going to get some attractive women, and you spend the night. Uh, but he just had a new girlfriend, and he really liked her, and he didn't want to do that. Uh, Although most, a lot of people would want to do that, but and that caused problems with his boss. So it's like, hey, and in sports, like, if you did sports, I know, but if you're a football player, and you want to be on the team, and you make the team, and then they say, oh yeah, well, we have kind of a thing we do, a ritual that we go through. It involves a lot of drinking. It involves some other things, some pain maybe, and that's like crazy. But to be on the team, to continue with your football dream, uh, you have to go through, a ritual that many of the young men who went through it, they're haunted by it, and it happens to women too. So,
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and this all loads onto autonomy and a lack thereof. Okay, so
yeah,
I'd just like
don't
to.
sacrifice. The lesson is there's three needs, but often we're asked to sacrifice autonomy. Other people will give us the relatedness we want only if we do as they want.
Yeah,
Other people will let us develop our competence and become the best only if we do the rituals they want, even though it violates like a basic sense of autonomy.
yeah, it's a very delicate balance in art in terms of perfecting it, right? Because if you do too much autonomy, you start to isolate yourself. But I think that's kind of how we kind of
Well,
limit
it's
it.
it's an interesting thing. You got to trust yourself. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I know some parents who don't want their kids involved in organized sports. They want their kids learning to kayak and bicycle, to do martial arts maybe,